Fort Hood, Texas, June 1958. The sun burned across the parade field as a line of young soldiers waited for inspection. Among them stood Private Elvis Presley, his famous hair now hidden under a helmet. When the laughter started, no one expected what came next. A moment that silenced the entire base. Fort Hood, Texas, June 12, 1958. The air was already thick before sunrise. That kind of Texas heat that wraps around your throat and doesn't let go. The bugle sounded over the loudspeakers, echoing through rows of low wooden barracks. A formation of 200 soldiers stood at attention on the cracked asphalt, the smell of boot polish and dust rising in the stillness. Among the ranks was a face every man recognized but pretended not to. Private Elvis Aaron Presley, serial number 5331761, 2nd Armored Division. Hell on wheels. The same man who once shook the world on television now stood silent, clutching a rifle that felt heavier than fame. His cap shadowed his eyes, but the outline of his jaw, familiar from 1,000 record sleeves, gave him away. A sergeant named William Red Harrelson stalked the line, chewing on a toothpick like it was his last shred of patience. He stopped in front of Elvis, squinting. "You used to dance on stages, boy. Let's see if you can march on dirt." Laughter rippled down the line. Not cruel yet, but testing. Soldiers elbowed one another, smirking. A few whispered jokes about Hollywood hips and blue suede boots. Elvis didn't flinch. He just nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." His voice, soft but steady, cut through the whispers like a chord struck in an empty hall. The sergeant barked the next order. 5-mile ruck. Full gear. Move out." Boots hit the ground in unison. Thud, thud, thud. The noise rolled across the field like distant thunder. The rhythm might have sounded like music if it weren't so brutal. The road ahead shimmered with heat, and dust rose in sheets that blurred the horizon. Private Joe Esposito, a stocky kid from Chicago who'd become one of Elvis's closest army friends, fell into stride beside him. "Ignore 'em," he muttered. "They don't know you yet." Elvis gave a tired smile. "They don't need to," he said. "I just gotta earn my place like everybody else." But the laughter wasn't done. A young private from Oklahoma, Thomas Dugan, decided to test how far he could push the world's most famous man. "Hey, Presley," he shouted from 2 rows back. "Sing us to Chow, superstar." The group cracked up, voices bouncing off the metal barracks. Even the sergeant didn't intervene. For a moment, Elvis slowed. You could almost hear his thoughts in the rhythm of his boots. Fame couldn't save him here. Cameras weren't coming. The only audience that mattered now was this platoon, and they weren't fans. A gust of wind carried dust into his eyes. He blinked it away, tightened his grip on the rifle, and pressed forward. Somewhere deep down, the rhythm of those marching boots began to sound like a beat, like something he could shape. The camera of imagination pulls close, sweat trickling, jaw set, eyes focused. He wasn't angry. He was waiting. And just ahead, past the next mile marker, he'd find a way to turn mockery into silence, without saying a single word. The sun climbed higher, and the road turned into a ribbon of glare. Sweat stung every soldier's eyes. Boots struck rhythm on dry earth. Thud, thud, thud. A few miles in, the platoon began to fray. Breath came ragged. Canteens rattled. Tempers thinned. That was when Private Dugan's voice cut through the rhythm. "Come on, Presley. Give us a song." The laughter burst again, louder this time, sharpened by exhaustion. It rolled through the formation like a spark in dry grass. Some chuckled to fit in. Others looked down, pretending not to hear. But the chant kept coming, crueler with repetition. "Sing us to Chow. Sing us to Chow." Sergeant Harrelson's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop it. He wanted to see how the famous recruit would respond. Every platoon needed a moment that broke its weakest man. Maybe this was it. Elvis didn't turn around. He just kept marching, boots steady, jaw locked. The rhythm underfoot became his shelter. 1, 2, 1, 2. He matched his breath to the cadence until it sounded almost like music beneath the noise. Private Esposito shot him a quick glance. "You gonna let him talk like that?" Elvis smiled faintly. Ain't nothing I can sing that'll change their tune yet. The camera of imagination pans across faces, dust-streaked, sunburned, eyes half-closed in fatigue. Soldiers, who'd never been close to fame, were now inches from it, and they were testing whether the idol had any cracks. By mile 2, the chant had spread. Even the rhythm of marching seemed to mock him. "Hollywood! Hollywood!" someone barked. Dugan grinned like a man on stage, feeding off the crowd. But sometimes the loudest room can't hear what silence is building underneath. Elvis felt the sting of it, not anger, but a weight behind the ribs. He thought of his mother, Gladys, who told him before he shipped out, "Don't fight for people to like you. Fight to stay kind." So he did the hardest thing. Nothing. No smirk, no word, no song. Just steady footsteps, dust rising behind him like smoke. At the halfway point, Harrelson called a short water break. Men dropped their packs, gulping from canteens, collapsing into whatever shade they could find. Dugan strutted past Elvis, clapping him on the shoulder. "Didn't think showbiz boys sweat this much." Elvis looked up, calm but direct. "Sweat don't care who you are, Private." The line cut the air clean. A few nearby soldiers blinked, half smiling. The tone had shifted, barely, but enough to feel it. As the order came to move again, Elvis did something unexpected. He moved from the middle of the line to the very front. The laughter dimmed. Whispers followed. Everyone watched the back of that famous head now leading the column. Harrelson noticed, narrowed his eyes and muttered to his assistant, "Let's see if the king can set tempo." Have you ever been the punchline in a room and realized the only way to end it was to stand taller, not louder? What would you have done? Fight back or lead forward? The heat shimmered ahead. Boots lifted in rhythm again. Elvis's pace was deliberate, slightly faster. Within a few minutes, the formation fell into step behind him. Even Dugan, out of breath, matched the beat. The only sound now was the chorus of synchronized steps and the steady breath of 200 men. The noise had turned into order, and order into quiet power. They didn't know it yet, but the man they'd mocked was about to teach them a cadence they'd never forget. As the camera pulls wide, dust rolls like smoke across the field. The laughter is gone, replaced by something heavier, respect forming in silence. And just as the next hill rose ahead, Elvis lifted a hand towards Sergeant Harrelson. He was about to ask for permission, one request that would change everything about that morning. "Permission to call cadence, Sergeant," Harrelson said. His voice carried a rough amusement, like a man tossing a dare into the wind. Elvis adjusted his helmet strap, his breath steady now. The road stretched before them, a line of dust cutting through fields baked under 90-degree heat. Somewhere far off, you could hear the metallic clatter of tank drills echoing through the valley. He took one step forward, then another, matching the platoon's weary rhythm, and then softly he began. 1, 2, 3, 4. The voice that once filled stadiums now floated low, measured, almost prayerful. The sound threaded through the line like a pulse. Soldiers began to breathe in time with it. 1, 2. A few muttered under their breath, trying not to join in, but it was impossible not to. The cadence was perfect, strong but calm, the kind that carried men forward when their legs were done. Private Dugan tried to smirk. "Still singing, huh?" But his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. His breath was gone. Elvis didn't answer. He just kept calling cadence, his tone growing steadier, turning the march into music. Sergeant Harrelson's eyes narrowed. He'd seen hundreds of recruits break under pressure. But this was new. Fame had taught Presley rhythm, but the army was now teaching him silence between the beats. By mile 4, the laughter was gone. Even Dugan's face had hardened, eyes fixed forward. The platoon moved as one organism, boots, breath, dust, and grit. The same man who once sang for screaming fans now commanded silence without a melody. Heat waves shimmered off the asphalt. Elvis's uniform was drenched, dark lines of sweat tracing down his back. Still, his voice didn't waver. The cadence rolled out like a slow drumbeat of defiance. 1, 2, keep it true. The words weren't from any manual. They came from instinct. The rhythm of church hymns and Mississippi roads, stitched together into something raw and human. The soldiers caught it unconsciously, echoing back. 1, 2, keep it true. That was when something subtle shifted. The mockery had turned to unity. What started as laughter had become momentum. Private Esposito glanced sideways. You got him now, E. Elvis smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on the road. Ain't about me, Joe. It's about finishing together. The camera zooms in on Dugan, face red, jaw tight, falling slightly behind. Elvis slowed his pace, just enough for Dugan to catch up. He didn't say a word, just let the rhythm adjust until the struggling soldier found his step again. The sergeant saw it too. He didn't shout, he just watched, arms crossed, realizing this wasn't weakness. It was command. What's harder, to fight for pride or to lead with compassion when no one expects it? And if strength is silence, how many people ever find it when they're being watched? The run continued. 5 miles turned into 6. Dust clung to every man's face. The heat warped the horizon into liquid gold. But somehow, that slow, steady cadence carried them all. At the final marker, Harrelson raised his hand. Company, halt! Boots slammed down in unison. The echo rolled like thunder and then disappeared into still air. Every man bent forward, gasping. Elvis stayed upright. His chest rose and fell, slow, deliberate. His voice, hoarse but unbroken, finished the last count. 1, 2, done. Silence. Then someone, maybe Esposito, started clapping. 1 man at first, then 5. Then the entire platoon. Even Harrelson didn't stop it. He just muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." The only sound louder than their applause was the absence of mockery. The crowd that had once laughed now stared, stunned as Elvis turned toward Dugan. Without a word, he unhooked his canteen, held it out, and said quietly, "Here, you'll need it more than I do." That one act landed heavier than any comeback ever could. As the sun sank low and shadows stretched long across the road, the platoon gathered around. No ranks now. Just men who'd shared a hard run and found a leader where they least expected one. And somewhere in that dry Texas field, laughter had been traded for respect, earned mile by mile. That night in the mess hall, someone found a reel-to-reel recorder humming quietly, and a mysterious tape labeled Cadence Presley. Night fell fast over Fort Hood. The parade field that had boiled with heat hours earlier now shimmered under pale light from the flood lamps. The air smelled of dust, metal, and detergent from the laundry building down the slope. In the barracks, boots lined the floor like soldiers at rest, but something was off. An unspoken quiet hung over the men. Private Joe Esposito sat on his bunk, wiping his rifle. Across the room, a handful of soldiers gathered near the small PX radio. The usual country station hummed low, almost background noise. Then it happened. The static cut, and a faint rhythmic sound came through. Thud, thud. 1, 2, keep it true. Heads lifted. Even the sergeant in the doorway froze. It wasn't the radio. It was them, recorded. Someone had captured the cadence from that morning's run. Private Dugan, the same man who'd mocked Elvis, looked uneasy. Who recorded that? He muttered. Esposito checked the player. An old Revere reel-to-reel, labelled in neat handwriting. Training Field C, Presley Cadence. Elvis, sitting at the edge of his bunk, looked up but said nothing. The playback filled the room. Dozens of boots hitting the ground. Elvis's voice steady and human between breaths. The sound wasn't glamorous. It was raw. It was what truth sounds like when stripped of music and spotlight. Then, quietly, someone said, "He made us finish that run." The others nodded. For the first time, Dugan didn't have a joke ready. His hands fidgeted with his dog tags. Sergeant Harrelson entered. "Where'd this come from?" "Don't know, sir. Found it in the mess hall, next to the projector case." The sergeant listened for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Not with anger, but something else. Maybe pride, maybe surprise. Then he turned to Presley. "Private, you got any idea who made this?" Elvis shook his head. No, Sergeant, but whoever did, they got the rhythm right. Harrelson gave a small nod. That's one hell of a cadence, Presley. You keep leading runs like that, you'll whip this unit into shape. The room exhaled. For the first time since training began, the laughter wasn't pointed. It was shared. A single act of grace had turned humiliation into harmony. Later that night, Elvis slipped outside. The moonlight spilled over the asphalt like milk. He leaned against the flagpole, listening to the faraway hum of engines. Joe Esposito joined him, 2 cups of black coffee in hand. You know, Joe said quietly, you didn't have to help Dugan back there. Elvis stared out into the dark. Maybe not, but I had to help myself. Couldn't let that anger stick to me, Joe smiled. He'll never live that down. Elvis took a sip, shaking his head. That ain't the point, Joe. You humiliate a man, he remembers the hurt. You help him, he remembers the moment. The camera of imagination moves in close, Elvis's face half shadowed, the faint shine of sweat on his temple reflecting the moonlight. Somewhere off screen, the sound of that recorded cadence fades in again, like a heartbeat echoing in the night. Back in the barracks, Dugan couldn't sleep. He played the tape again, quietly this time. When the cadence reached the halfway mark, he did something none of the men expected. He walked out, canteen in hand, and found Elvis still outside. He held it out. You gave me yours earlier. Here's mine. Fair trade. Elvis looked at the canteen, then up at Dugan. No sarcasm. No tension. Just mutual understanding between 2 tired men who had finally stopped performing. Appreciate it, Elvis said simply. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Crickets filled the silence. What changes a man faster, discipline or dignity? And if forgiveness has a sound, could it be a steady beat under tired boots? When Dugan turned to leave, he said quietly, Guess I owe you one, Presley. Elvis smiled. Nah, we're square. From that night on, no one called him Hollywood. They called him Cadence. Word of the tape spread beyond the platoon. Within weeks, soldiers in other companies started asking to hear it. A few even borrowed the reel to use during morning drills. Each time the rhythm played, simple, grounding. Human Harrelson approved it officially. Presley Cadence, field training use authorized. By the time the unit finished basic, the same voice once mocked on the field had become the sound that carried them through it. Respect didn't come from rank or fame. It came from keeping pace when no one else could. And yet, Elvis never spoke about it again. No interviews, no letters, no boasting. Just a moment that lived quietly in the memory of those who'd been there. The real would vanish for decades, until one day, long after Elvis was gone, it reappeared in a museum archive box labelled Personal Effects, Fort Hood, 1958. But that's another chapter. When the museum staff played that old tape, they didn't expect what was recorded after the cadence ended. The reel clicked off with a soft thump. For a moment, there was only the faint hum of the barracks lights. The next morning, word of that mysterious tape spread like wildfire through Fort Hood. By chow time, soldiers from other units were stopping by the mess hall asking, "You guys really got the Presley cadence?" Within 24 hours, it wasn't just a rumor. It was tradition. Harrelson's platoon would march and Elvis would lead. No cameras, no fanfare, just 200 boots pounding dust into rhythm. The first morning it happened, the field looked like something out of a film. Fog still lifting off the grass, the sun a gold halo on the horizon. The platoon lined up quietly, no chatter this time. Everyone waited for the sound they didn't know they needed. Elvis adjusted his strap, cleared his throat, and began. 1, 2, keep it true. The line behind him answered, 1, 2, keep it true. Then came Esposito's baritone echo, Dugan's gravel voice, Harrelson's bark keeping time. The whole company fell into cadence. Each word hit like a drumbeat carved into the morning air. Down the road, recruits from other divisions stopped what they were doing just to listen. The sound rolled across the open ground, measured, proud, defiant. For once the laughter wasn't mocking, it was pure awe. The same voice that once made girls faint was now teaching men how to stand taller. As the run continued, Harrelson noticed something he couldn't explain. The rhythm wasn't just physical, it was emotional. When men stumbled, others pulled them back into sync. When breath grew short, they borrowed strength from the voice leading them. By mile 3, it wasn't a company running anymore. It was a community. Private Dugan, the one-time heckler, now ran shoulder to shoulder with Elvis. His voice cracked but didn't stop. 1, 2, keep it true, he gasped. Elvis grinned between breaths. You're getting better, Private. They finished the run stronger than ever before. No one collapsed. No one cursed. The field ended in a thunder of synchronized boots. One last stomp that echoed across the base. Sergeant Harrelson removed his cap, wiping his brow. I've been in the army 20 years, he said, half to himself, and I ain't ever seen a formation move like that. He turned to Elvis. You did that without a word of command. You think that's music? Elvis shook his head. No, Sergeant, that's respect. What's louder, a man's voice, or the silence of those who've learned to listen? And how do you turn mockery into harmony without saying you're hurt? Later that week, Colonel Franklin, the base commander, showed up unannounced to observe morning training. Word had reached him of Presley's cadence. He stood beside Harrelson as the platoon assembled. When Elvis called out the first rhythm, the colonel's eyebrows lifted. That him? Harrelson nodded. That's him. By the time the run ended, the colonel was smiling. Record that cadence, he said. Every base should have it. Within days, a proper recording was made. Field mic, reel to reel, one take. The date marked clearly on the label. Fort Hood. June 18th, 1958, cadence run, but Presley leading. The sound wasn't perfect. Wind hissed, boots scuffed, voices cracked. But it was real. You could feel the unity in every beat. That recording traveled faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, bases from Georgia to Kentucky were using the Presley cadence to train recruits. Soldiers who'd never met him kept step to his rhythm. Elvis never bragged about it. When reporters later asked about his army life, he only said, "Those boys taught me more about rhythm than any drummer ever did." But for the men who'd been there, it was more than rhythm. It was redemption, his and theirs. In the quiet that followed that morning run, Dugan walked beside him again. "You know," he said, "you didn't just make us run better. You made us remember what we're here for." Elvis looked at him, smiling through sweat. "We're here to finish together." That simple sentence became their motto. Harrelson had it printed on a piece of canvas and nailed it above the barracks door. We finish together. Years later, long after Elvis left the army, that motto stayed painted there, yellowed by time. Recruits still recited it before dawn runs. None of them knew where it came from, but the few old-timers who did would smile and say, "It started the day the king stopped being famous and became one of us. He joined to serve, but he stayed to lead." The transformation wasn't about turning a star into a soldier. It was about showing how humility turns fame into purpose. The man who'd once been chased by crowds had finally found the peace of marching among equals. Years later, when that dusty reel resurfaced in a museum, curators discovered a final 30 seconds that no one had ever heard before, something recorded after the cadence ended. Decades later, Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood. A curator named Miriam Clark was cataloguing old army tapes when she came across a worn cardboard box labelled Training Field C, Presley. 1958, the tape inside was brittle, edges frayed, still carrying the faint scent of machine oil and dust. She threaded it through the old Revere recorder, pressed play and listened, boots striking dirt, a breath between beats. Then that same rhythm, 1, 2, keep it true. The sound filled the quiet archive room. Even after 40 years it felt alive. But what came after the cadence ended was what stopped her cold. A faint voice, Elvis's, caught on the tail end of the reel. Just a whisper, almost drowned by static. Keep looking out for each other. Boys, then silence. The world had his music, but the army had his message. Miriam blinked, rewound it, played it again to be sure. The words were real. Simple, human, unpolished, like a message left for anyone who'd ever struggled to be understood. The museum restored the tape and placed it under glass. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Cadence of Compassion, Private Elvis Presley, Fort Hood, June 1958. Visitors leaned close, listening through headphones, hearing the rhythm that once held 200 men together. Veterans sometimes stood there longer than others, their lips moving with the count. Private Dugan's letter, yellowed and framed beside it, read, "He never needed to sing to lead. He just gave us breath when we'd run out." What echoes longer, applause or the quiet rhythm of integrity? Outside, a new generation of soldiers jogged past the museum, boots pounding in cadence. Some of them still used that same beat, unaware of where it began. And every so often, on misty mornings, the staff swore they could still hear it faintly, the old cadence rolling through the Texas fog. But that final whisper on the tape, those 7 words, would soon make headlines worldwide, sparking a tribute no one saw coming. When the story of that tape finally reached the media, headlines called it the cadence that changed Fort Hood. But those who'd been there knew it wasn't just about rhythm. It was about a man who chose grace over pride. Elvis never bragged, never told the story. He didn't need to. The men who marched beside him carried it in their voices, long after the world forgot the run that turned mockery into music. The moral lived in 7 quiet words. Keep looking out for each other. Boys. That's what leadership sounds like when the spotlight's gone. Because true strength isn't in the applause, or the uniform, or the fame. It's in the moment you could retaliate and choose compassion instead. And maybe that's why the cadence still echoes, faint but steady, reminding anyone who's ever been doubted that silence can be louder than a crowd. If this story moved you, share it forward, not for Elvis, but for anyone who's ever been laughed at and kept walking anyway. Because sometimes the quietest moments write the loudest legacies.